Hi there, it's day 8, Monday, the start of your second week of your paleo reset. So good that you're here, and congratulations for having just completed your first week. And just in case you've come across this video on YouTube and you don't know what I'm talking about, please just click the link in the video notes below and jump across to my website, and that will tell you all about this 31-day detox and reset health program following the ancestral health model. And today, for those of you who are doing the program, we're starting to get into the reasons behind all of the recommendations. Today, we're talking specifically about excess carbohydrates and insulin resistance. So this is a topic which is super important for all human beings of the planet in this period of time. So and so this video will explain all about why the paleo diet is specifically low carb. And I do think that when you understand why this is, why it's a low carb diet, then you will want to do your best to transform your metabolism from sugar burner to fat burner. That image on the email, that very first image there, is basically what my pantry used to look like. That was a photo that I took before we started with the ancestral health, and so that was what my pantry looked like, and as you'll see now, it's basically just all carbohydrates. So excess carbohydrates and insulin resistance, when you consume glucose, which are carbohydrates, amino acids, which are your proteins, and your fatty acids, which are your fats, your body will always burn the glucose first. Okay? So it doesn't matter what you're eating in what quantity, it will always burn the glucose first. And so it's important to know that when we eat any type of carbohydrate, anytime, healthy or unhealthy, our digestive enzymes break it down into glucose, right? Glucose is a simple sugar. So whether it's bread or pasta or banana or potatoes, orange juice or alcohol, fruit or sweets, doesn't matter. Once the glucose enters the bloodstream, it's all sugar. Okay? Now, remember from yesterday that our genes, right, our DNA, our genetic makeup, our genes always promote our survival in the here and now, right? So the body-brain doesn't care about the origin of the glucose, right? Healthy or unhealthy has nothing to do with it. When our blood sugar levels are too high for safety, our genes have to respond. So they stimulate the pancreas to release the hormone insulin. Now, insulin's job is to quickly get the excess glucose out of the bloodstream and store it so that it can be transformed later into energy. Now, the problem is that a constant consumption of carbohydrates triggers a chain reaction of hormonal and metabolic reactions that begin with a high production of insulin and ends with lifestyle disease. Okay, now it happens like this. So we're talking about a constant consumption of carbohydrates here, okay, a chronic consumption. And you can look at this, the example there of the carbohydrate curve. So study that, and that sort of explains, what we're talking about in terms of carbohydrates per day. So insulin, the blood sugar regulator, when insulin pulls glucose out of the blood, it has to put it somewhere. Okay, this is important to know. When insulin pulls the glucose out of the blood, it has to put it somewhere. It's not excreted, right? It has to put it somewhere. And the main storage sites are the liver and the muscles, which store glucose in the form of glycogen. Now, when it's stored in the liver, the glycogen can easily be converted back into glucose and re-enter the bloodstream as energy. But the glucose stored in the muscles cannot be emptied into the bloodstream. It can only be used by the muscles themselves. And so this means that if you're not training physically and intensely, you're probably not burning the muscle glycogen. Now, when the liver and the muscles are full, excess glucose is converted into palmitic acid. And palmitic acid binds together in threes with glycerol to form triglycerides. and triglycerides are stored in our adipose tissue. That is, it's stored as fat. So, glucagon. Glucagon releases the fat from storage. When blood sugar levels become too low, the pancreas releases the hormone glucagon. Now, glucagon is responsible for accessing the triglycerides that are stored in the fat cells and converting them back into free fatty acids, right? So they can be released back into the bloodstream, right? So think about it. When they're in the cells, they're trapped, but when they're converted into free fatty acids, they're free to go back into the bloodstream, okay? So the important thing to know is that the pancreas doesn't multitask. The pancreas cannot release insulin and glucagon at the same time, right? We can't store fat and burn fat at the same time. And as well, the pancreas can only release glucagon when our insulin levels are low, right? So the problems start when insulin levels are chronically high due to a constant consumption of carbohydrates. Now, insulin resistance. When our fat cells are full, they become resistant to insulin. It's like insulin is knocking at the door, but the cells refuse to respond. They're full. Okay, so what happens? The pancreas pumps out more insulin. It starts shouting out loud, "Let me in." But the cells put a no vacancy sign on the door, and this means that nutrients can't enter the cells, right? So at this point, two things are happening. Insulin is high, which means it continues to pull glucose from the bloodstream. And at the same time, no nutrients can enter the cells because they're full and they've become resistant to insulin's command. So the brain receives the message, right? The brain receives the message that we don't have enough energy or nutrients in our bloodstream to survive, right? That is, we're starving. And in a sense, this is true because despite all of the energy that we have in storage, we can't access it, right? So remember that glucagon can't be released when insulin levels are high. Now, the appetite hormones, leptin and ghrelin, they respond immediately to the alarm. We need energy, give us fuel. And they send out signals of hunger and craving that manipulate us to obtain nutrients as quickly as possible so that we don't die of hunger, so that we don't die from a lack of nutrients, right? And as you can imagine, for the body brain, this is all extremely stressful. The stress causes the release of the stress hormone, cortisol, and we'll look at all of that later on. But you can see how this creates a vicious cycle or a vicious circle, and it all starts with a high carbohydrate consumption. Okay, so the trap is this. The problem is this: only carbohydrates can satisfy the craving, right? Because the body is so used to getting carbohydrates every couple of hours, and because it can't burn the fat that's in storage, it becomes trapped in the metabolic preference of the sugar burner. And resisting isn't as simple as willpower, right? Your body brain will manipulate you to consume any type of carbohydrate because it thinks that you're dying. So you put the carbohydrates in your mouth, glucose enters the bloodstream, causing high insulin levels. Insulin draws the excess glucose out and seeks to put it somewhere, but the cells are already full and won't accept any more triglycerides. And the blood triglycerides rise. And in a very short time, you're hungry again because blood sugar level is low. And also you're anxious and you're horrible. And so you eat more carbohydrates and so on, right? It's a cycle that will end in lifestyle disease unless you change gears from sugar burner to fat burner, which you can do in less than a month by choosing wisely what we put in our mouth, right? So if you follow the recommendations of the program here, we'll get that change happening, right? But you do need to be a bit patient. You do need to get through the carb flu, yeah, and you just need to you just need to be strong and go with it and trust in the process, because it will take 21 days. That's sort of a medium. Okay, so that's the information for today. There's a little section there on hormones if you're not quite sure what hormones are, and the section eat is really useful, right? It's just encouraging you to reflect upon your carbohydrate consumption normally, before you started this. How many times a day were you reaching for carbohydrates or sugar or glucose in any form? And be really honest when you're thinking about this. Count the unhealthy carbohydrates like sweets and sugar in your coffee and honey in your tea and alcohol and cookies, as well as all of the healthy carbohydrates like yogurt and fruit and your healthy snack bars and your dried fruit like figs and dates and your whole grains and your legumes. Just think about all of it and just write down how many times a day you were reaching for carbohydrates, because I was shocked. When I started this, I thought that I'd been eating in the correct way, in the recommended way, and I was shocked when I found out about this, about how many times I was just reaching for carbohydrates, for glucose in one manner or form. So that's I know there's a lot of information there, so read through it in your own time, or watch the video again if you need to assimilate all of this, and just keep going here. Keep going here. The movement recommendation for today is just to move frequently throughout the day, and the motivation exercise is your gratitude practice. Okay, so connect with me if you need to, and I will see you tomorrow. Okay, ciao.